May 21st, 1940, 4:47 hours. Just south of Arras, northern France. The dawn was a pale smear across the low ridges, mist clinging to hedgerows like reluctant ghosts. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from the previous night's skirmishes. Every step on the soggy field left a sucking imprint, and every distant boom rolled through the hollow hills like a warning drum. Soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, rifles slick in their hands, hearts thrumming against steel helmets. The quiet was deceptive. It tasted of tension, of a storm waiting to break. Sergeant Harold Stevens of the 1st Battalion, Royal Tank Regiment, leaned against his Matilda II. The tank's hull glistened with wet fog, armor thick and silent, its 2-pounder gun waiting with a predator's patience. The British crew, all young faces pressed against periscopes and hatches, exchanged quiet, taut glances. Outside, the world still seemed almost serene, until the first whump of artillery cracked the dawn, the ground trembling as German shells dug furrows into the wet soil. From the north, the rhythmic thunder of German panzers grew louder. Their silhouettes were dark blurs against the mist. Panzer IIs, IIIs, and IVs, a rolling tide of steel and wheels. The German crews laughed, confident in the might of their mechanized advance. The slow British toy, they called it, oblivious to the hidden fury inside its armored shell. Every laugh and jest made the tension inside the Matilda tighter, the soldiers bracing against the inevitable confrontation. The hedgerows shivered as artillery rounds splashed earth into the air. Birds flinched from trees, wings striking against each other in frantic escape. Stevens whispered through the intercom, voice calm but firm. Positions ready. Gun crews, 2-pounder primed. Keep eyes sharp. Every member of the crew nodded. Outside, the Germans were still advancing, unknowing of the trap that waited. The 1st Panzers crossed a ridge, their tracks chewing mud and grass. Stevens could hear the Engine's throaty roar, the metallic clatter echoing through the valley. One Panzer commander raised his binoculars, squinting through the fog, and laughed again at the small Matilda sitting like a statue in the mist. He had no idea that in moments, that laughter would freeze in terror. Inside the tank, Stevens's hands gripped the controls, pulse steady. Every soldier knew the stakes. Behind this ridge lay the heart of the German advance, and ahead, possibly death. But retreat was not an option. The Matilda II, slow and ungainly, had impenetrable armor, a fact few Germans had faced. And tonight, the crew was ready to prove its lethal precision. Suddenly, the ground shuddered as the 1st Panzer round detonated nearby. Mud spraying against the Matilda's side. Sparks flickered in the mist. The soldiers flinched but held their positions. Stevens exhaled slowly, scanning the approaching line. Aim small, hit hard, he muttered, a mantra drilled into every gunner since training. Outside, the German tanks continued their confident advance, unaware that the next minutes would redefine armored warfare. The tension became almost unbearable. Each second stretched, every creak of metal, every whispered command magnified in the early morning stillness. Then, a loud crack. An enemy tank commander shouted an order. The first shells were coming straight for them. Stevens pressed the trigger of the Matilda's 2-pounder. Smoke hissed. The shell flew, cutting through the mist like a silver blade. It struck the lead Panzer III squarely, armor crumpling. The tank shuddered violently, then tipped sideways, crew scrambling inside. German laughter ceased, replaced by sudden, sharp shouts. The line hesitated, confused, as one of their tanks exploded in a plume of fire and metal. For a heartbeat, the valley froze. Then the 2nd Panzer fired. Its shell bounced harmlessly off the Matilda's front plate, sparks spraying like fireworks. The crew inside grinned, adrenaline surging. Stevens called out targets, directing shells with precise timing and calm authority. Each shot found its mark, each explosion sending another ripple of panic through the German advance. The dawn mist, once serene, now swirled with smoke, fire, and the scent of gunpowder. The hedgerows shivered violently as panzer tracks tore through them, leaving destruction in their wake. But the Matilda held, like a stone sentinel in the chaos. The Germans, confident moments ago, now began to glance at each other, realizing that this toy was far deadlier than it seemed. Then a sudden jolt. An enemy shell scored a glancing hit on the rear track. The tank shuddered but did not stop. Stevens barked orders. Steady. Keep her moving. The crew adjusted, and the Matilda slid forward, impervious and deliberate, turning the battlefield into a killing field. And just as the next German squadron crested the ridge, ready to engage fully, the sun struggled through the thick fog, casting a sickly gray glow over the churned battlefield. Mud clung to every boot, every tank track, as if the earth itself were trying to hold back the approaching storm. The roar of German engines grew louder, a mechanical tide advancing over the hills. Sergeant Harold Stevens peered through the Matilda II's periscope, his eyes sharp, calculating. Every panzer, every turret, every hatch represented a target, a puzzle of steel waiting to be solved. The Germans thought speed and firepower alone would overwhelm them. They were wrong. The Matilda's armor was nearly impervious to their 37mm and 50mm guns. The 2-pounder could not match the destructive potential of a larger caliber, but it demanded precision, exact aim, perfect timing. Stevens knew the battlefield like the back of his hand. The hedgerows, the muddy fields, the folds of low hills. Each obstacle could be used, each ridge could be a killing angle. The first wave of panzers reached the shallow valley before the Matilda. Commanders shouted orders, voices strained, fear creeping into their normally confident tone. Their tanks advanced in formation, wheels churning mud and leaves, guns swiveling to scan for the British toy. Then came the sound Stevens had been waiting for, the unmistakable crunch of lead against armor. "Front left," he called. The Matilda's 2-pounder thundered, spitting a shell that slammed into a Panzer III's side. Metal screamed. The tank rocked violently, then tilted, its tracks tearing free from the soft soil. Inside, the crew panicked, trying to regain control. A second shell followed, this time into the lead Panzer IV, striking the turret and sending it spinning like a top. Flames licked the morning mist. The Germans hesitated. One tank fired, its round glancing harmlessly off the Matilda's thick armor. Another tried to flank the British tank, crawling through mud and broken hedgerows. Stevens anticipated the move. Right side for a clock. Aim! The shell found its mark, ripping into the flank of the Panzer II. Its engine exploded, smoke and flame rising in a black plume. From inside the Matilda, the crew's nerves coiled tighter with every shot. Gunner, loader, commander. They worked as a single organism, movements rehearsed, reactions instinctive. Outside, the Germans realized that speed and numbers could not match a tank that refused to die. A tank whose fire cut through the heart of their advance. A shell exploded nearby, sending mud and fragments skimming across the Matilda's hull. The crew ducked instinctively, hearts hammering, but no serious damage came. Stevens smiled grimly. "Not today," he muttered. Around them, the battlefield had become a chaotic dance of smoke, fire, and metal. The once confident German crews now shouted frantic orders, trying to regroup. Suddenly, a Panzer IV commander raised his binoculars, eyes wide in disbelief. "What is this?" he barked. "It's impossible." Other tankers looked to him, fear creeping into their faces. They had been taught to respect British armor, but never like this. The Matilda was moving like a phantom, its slow, deliberate advance punishing every overconfident tank that dared approach. Stevens watched as a Panzer III tried to slip around the hedgerow, seeking a weak point. The British gunner caught it instantly. Target acquired. Fire. The shell tore through the side armor, flames erupting. Crew members scrambled inside, smoke filling the cabin, and then silence. Another panzer tried the same trick. Another direct hit. The German formation faltered, confusion spreading like wildfire. In the trenches behind the Matilda, British infantry watched, stunned. Rumors of the Invincible tank had circulated, but witnessing it in action, in the open, was another reality entirely. Shouts of encouragement erupted among the soldiers, a mix of awe and adrenaline. The Germans, in contrast, had gone from laughing to cursing, their advance now teetering on the edge of collapse. Stevens knew the risk. The Matilda was slow, vulnerable to concentrated artillery if the Germans realized how to coordinate their fire. But he had learned patience was more powerful than speed. He moved the tank forward again, inch by deliberate inch, presenting a target that invited overconfidence, and then punishing it with lethal precision. The German commander tried to rally his crews. Focus! Fire together! Don't let one tank stop us. But the Matilda II was already rewriting the rules of engagement. Every tank that approached too closely was neutralized. Every attempt at flanking ended in fire and metal. The valley became a tomb for the panzers, smoke curling into the mist, bodies and twisted machinery scattered across the mud. The psychological toll was apparent. Tank crews whispered prayers, some froze entirely, their guns useless against the impenetrable British armor. Commanders shouted and gestured, but no order could penetrate the panic that spread. Stevens felt a cold satisfaction, not cruelty, but clarity. They had underestimated him, underestimated the tank, underestimated what disciplined, precise teamwork could achieve. Then, a sudden shift. The German artillery began to concentrate on the Matilda. Shells fell around the British tank, splashing mud and tearing small craters in the earth. One near miss rocked the hull, throwing the crew against their restraints. "Brace!" Stevens shouted, voice cutting over the explosions. The Matilda shuddered, but its armor held. Inside, the crew exchanged grim, determined glances. The Germans had expected an easy breakthrough. What they faced instead was a wall of steel, a single tank turning the tide of an entire advance. Yet Stevens knew the danger was far from over. Supplies were limited, ammunition finite, and every second brought more panzers to the field. The battle, as chaotic and cinematic as it was, still had its turning point looming. And then, as if the valley itself held its breath, a new sound rose above the chaos. A clatter of boots, the whine of engines, a German commander screaming, orders colliding with fear. The Matilda's 2-pounder had a target lined up, the crew's eyes glinting with resolve. And at that precise moment, a massive Panzer IV lurched from the mist, its turret rotating with deadly intent. The Matilda crew knew the next few seconds could decide everything. The mist hung heavy, curling around hedgerows and tree leans, turning the battlefield into a half-lit nightmare. Smoke from burning panzers twisted into the gray morning like black serpents, and the acrid tang of gunpowder burned the air. Sergeant Harold Stevens adjusted the Matilda's gun, feeling every vibration through the hull. Each panzer's approach was calculated, each maneuver a test of nerve and skill. He knew this moment could decide not only his crew's fate, but the fate of the entire British advance south of Arras. The massive Panzer IV that had emerged from the fog rolled forward, treads churning the mud, gun turrets spinning like a predator seeking prey. Its commander squinted through optics, trying to locate the British tank that had decimated his comrades. The other German tanks hesitated behind him, waiting, watching, unsure of how to break the stalemate. The once confident division now moved cautiously, the laughter of hours ago replaced by tension and uncertainty. Inside the Matilda, the crew moved like clockwork. Gunner, loader, driver, commander, all aware of the stakes, all attuned to one another's movements. Stevens studied the incoming Panzer IV, tracking weak points, calculating distance and angle. One miscalculation could be fatal. Outside, mud spat and splintered as German shells ricocheted harmlessly off the Matilda's front armor. Sparks flew, painting the mist with fleeting flashes of white. Target locked. Stevens' voice cut through the intercom. The gunner adjusted the 2-pounder, waiting for the precise moment. The shell left the barrel with a whistle, flying through the mist. It struck the Panzer IV squarely in the side turret. Metal buckled. Flames erupted. The tank lurched, crew scrambling inside as smoke and fire enveloped it. The valley filled with the scent of burning oil, scorched steel, and human fear. The German line wavered. Tanks that had been advancing now slowed, tracking the Matilda with caution, their commanders exchanging panic shouts. Stevens pressed the advantage, pushing the tank forward, forcing another wave of panzers into a killing zone. His crew's hearts pounded in rhythm with the explosions, a mix of terror and exhilaration that only soldiers in the heart of combat could know. A German Panzer II tried to flank left, crawling through mud and broken hedgerows, hoping to exploit the Matilda's limited speed. Stevens anticipated the move. Right flank, watch the gap. The 2-pounder roared again. Shell met armor. The Panzer II exploded, hurling debris into the mist. The echo of metal tearing, engines dying, and crew shouting reverberated through the valley. Yet, even as victory seemed within reach, danger lurked. Artillery shells began to land closer and closer, shaking the earth, sending splinters of soil and rock against the Matilda's hull. Stevens felt the vibrations through his gloves, the weight of the tank beneath him, the immovable presence of steel against chaos. The crew braced, adrenaline surging, nerves honed to razor edges. From the German side, fear mixed with desperation. Commanders shouted conflicting orders. Tank crews froze in indecision. Artillery crews aimed blindly, hoping to land a lucky strike. The Matilda, slow but deliberate, remained a phantom of destruction, moving forward inch by inch. Each shell fired a testament to precision and training. Then chaos. A German Panzer IV attempted a bold maneuver, surging through the center, its gun trained on the Matilda. Stevens's eyes narrowed. He saw the slight gap in the tracks as the tank adjusted for mud. Hold steady now. The 2-pounder fired. The shell tore through the turret's side armor, sending the German tank spinning and collapsing into the mud. Flames roared, metal shrieked, and the air filled with the cries of panicked crews. The valley seemed to hold its breath. British infantry, watching from concealed positions, whispered in awe and disbelief. The toy tank, that had once seemed slow and harmless, was now a wall of steel, a single point of defiance that shattered the enemy advance. German troops fell back, regrouping behind hedgerows, realizing that speed and numbers alone could not overcome steel and discipline. Stevens knew, however, that the fight was not over. Another wave of panzers was approaching, heavier, faster, determined to break through. The Matilda's ammunition was finite, and the psychological strain on the crew was immense. Sweat mixed with mud on their faces, hands stiff from recoil and vibration, eyes raw from smoke and adrenaline. Every second stretched into eternity. A deafening roar announced the arrival of a new panzer division cresting a distant ridge. Their engines drowned out even the cries and explosions closer to the Matilda. The Germans had learned caution but were not deterred. They were determined to overwhelm the British tank. Stevens took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on him. One mistake, one missed shot, and the entire advance south of Arras could collapse. The Matilda's crew worked silently, anticipating, reacting, adapting. Every shell fired was calculated. Every move of the tank was deliberate, each one designed to exploit the enemy's overconfidence and hesitation. The valley became a theater of destruction, a deadly ballet of metal and fire, each side learning the brutal calculus of armored warfare in real time. Then, a flash in the mist. A panzer commander had misjudged the Matilda's speed. The 2-pounder found its mark. The German tank erupted in a sheet of flame, rolling violently into the churned earth. Silence followed for a heartbeat, broken only by the hissing of cooling metal and distant artillery. The German advance had slowed to a crawl. Confidence had been shattered. Fear now dictated the rhythm of their movement. Stevens's heart pounded, a steady, relentless beat, as he scanned the misty battlefield. The Matilda II had become more than a tank. It was a symbol, a moving fortress of resistance. The Germans had underestimated it, underestimated him, underestimated what discipline, precision, and nerves of steel could accomplish. And then, through the haze, the unmistakable shape of the German commander's personal Panzer IV emerged, a towering, ominous silhouette. Its presence was a challenge, a final test. The Matilda crew knew that one miscalculation now could mean annihilation, not just for them, but for every soldier relying on their stand to hold the line. The mist thickened, smoke coiling into twisting pillars, the valley alive with fire and tension. The German tank advanced, turrets swinging like a predator circling its prey. The Matilda's 2-pounder waited, silent and deadly, ready to strike with precision. Every heartbeat inside the tank was a countdown. The next few seconds would define history, etch the names of the crew into the story of armored warfare forever. The German commander raised his gun, aiming at the Matilda's front armor. Engines growled, mud sprayed. Time slowed. The two tanks faced each other, poised for the climactic clash that could decide the fate of the valley. The valley held its breath. Mist and smoke swirled, shrouding the battlefield in a gray haze that blurred the edges of reality. The Matilda II crouched like a steel predator, its massive frame unmoving yet impossibly alive with potential. Inside, Sergeant Harold Stevens and his crew felt the rhythm of war in their veins. The relentless pulse of anticipation, the thrill and terror of facing a force far larger than themselves. Every second stretched. Every heartbeat was a drum of imminent action. The German commander in the Panzer IV adjusted his sights, eyes narrowed, lips pressed in a thin line. Behind him, his crews were tense, grips tight on controls, eyes flicking nervously at their advancing comrades. The ruins of Panzer IIs and IIIs smoking across the muddy field. This was supposed to be a clean breakthrough. Instead, they were on the precipice of disaster. Their advance stalled by one tank and its crew of 4 men. Stevens surveyed the valley through the periscope. He saw the slight depression in the ground where artillery rounds had dug craters, the hedgerows shredded by tank treads, the panicked German infantry seeking cover from their own unstoppable machines. He could feel their uncertainty, their fear, and he used it. He moved the Matilda forward just enough to draw fire, each inch deliberate, a calculated risk. Sparks flew as German shells ricocheted off his armor. None penetrated. None even slowed him. Target the lead Panzer IV. Hold nothing back, Stevens ordered. The loader slammed a shell into the 2-pounder. The gunner adjusted the sight. Outside, the German tank commander realized too late that the British tank was advancing on his terms. The first shot tore through the fog, a streak of silver light followed by thunder. It struck the Panzer IV squarely in the turret. Metal screamed, the hatch burst open, and a plume of fire erupted. The tank lurched violently, smoke curling into the sky, burning fuel mingling with the morning mist. The German commander's scream was cut short by the explosion, and the crew inside was thrown into chaos. Panic rippled through the remaining German panzers. Coordination dissolved into chaos. Some fired blindly. Others tried to maneuver around the Matilda, only to find themselves trapped by hedgerows or pinned by shellfire. Every overconfident maneuver was punished with lethal precision. Stevens guided the tank forward, inch by painstaking inch, forcing them into a deadly trap of his own design. The valley shook again as German artillery focused their fire on the Matilda. Shells tore into the earth around them, mud and rock spraying, some striking the tank's tracks. One shell clipped the side, bouncing off with sparks. Inside, the crew braced. Driver adjusted. Stevens kept his focus razor-sharp. One mistake now could be fatal. Yet the Matilda moved as though guided by instinct. A fortress alive with strategy, firepower, and determination. A Panzer II tried to circle the Matilda from the left. Gunner fired. Metal buckled. Flames erupted, the tank spinning into a shallow crater. Another German tank fired its cannon, shell striking the Matilda's front plate. Sparks danced. No penetration. Stevens smiled grimly. Precision was everything. Patience more deadly than firepower. From the rear, German infantry opened fire on the Matilda, rifles and machine guns rattling, but the thick armor shrugged off small arms entirely. The valley had become a war theater sculpted in smoke, fire, and mud, every tank, every shell, every movement contributing to the tension that gripped both sides. British soldiers in hiding watched with wide eyes, understanding that history was unfolding before them. A single tank defying the very concept of armored supremacy. The German commander tried one last gamble. 2 Panzer IVs surged forward in tandem, flanking, turret guns spinning. The Matilda crew adjusted. Gunner fired. Loader reloaded at lightning speed. Shells tore through engines, tracks, and turrets. Flames erupted. Screams echoed through the mist. The German formation staggered, cohesion gone, morale shattered. Then came the moment of truth. A massive Panzer IV, the division commander's personal tank, rumbled out of the fog. It was larger, newer, more heavily armed, and its arrival could tilt the balance. Inside the Matilda, time slowed. Stevens knew the shot had to be perfect. Misfire, miscalculation, hesitation, any would be fatal. "Hold steady," he muttered. The German tank leveled its gun. Its commander, eyes wide, realized the gravity too late. The 2-pounder roared, a thin silver streak cutting through fog and smoke. Impact, explosion, metal folded, turret spun, fire and smoke engulfed the tank. The valley seemed to shudder in awe. The division commander's tank, the heart of the German advance, was destroyed. Silence followed, punctuated only by the hissing of burning tanks and distant artillery. The remaining Germans hesitated. The invincible-seeming wall of armor that had terrified them had been shattered by one disciplined crew. Confidence evaporated. Fear took its place. The Matilda II, slow and seemingly cumbersome, had rewritten the rules of engagement. It was no longer a toy tank. It was legend. Stevens allowed himself a brief breath, but knew the fight was not fully over. Smoke still hung heavy, artillery still fired sporadically, and isolated panzers continued to skirmish. Yet something profound had changed. The German advance had stalled. Their belief in inevitability, in mechanized supremacy, had been broken. The battlefield's perception of armored warfare, its calculations, its assumptions, would never be the same. The valley was a tableau of fire, smoke, and shattered metal. Soldiers, both German and British, peered through smoke, their faces pale, adrenaline still pumping. Stories would be told of this day, of the British toy that refused to die, that turned the tide with a combination of armor, precision, and unwavering courage. But even as the crew of the Matilda II took a brief moment of grim satisfaction, the fog thickened ahead. More panzers could be coming. Supplies were limited. Ammunition was finite. The quiet after such destruction was deceptive. Stevens knew that the next few hours could demand even greater courage, even greater strategy. And somewhere, beyond the smoke and chaos, the German commanders were regrouping, plotting, determined to overcome the legend that had become the Matilda II. The valley was silent now, but the silence was uneasy, thick with smoke, scorched earth, and the lingering smell of burning fuel. The morning mist had turned gray and acrid, curling in the aftermath of the chaos. Piles of twisted metal and shattered hedgerows littered the field. German panzers, once proud symbols of mechanized might, lay smoldering and broken. The cries of panicked crews had faded into groans, and the occasional distant scream of the wounded echoed like a grim reminder of the cost of war. Sergeant Harold Stevens climbed slightly from the periscope, eyes scanning the battlefield. The Matilda II sat unscathed among the carnage, its thick armor bearing only superficial scratches. Inside, the crew exhaled together, a slow, shared release of tension that left them trembling yet alive. They had held the line, shattered an entire panzer division's confidence, and lived to tell the story. Yet no one in the tank allowed themselves the luxury of celebration. From the north, a few surviving German tanks began to pull back, their commanders wary, unsure of what force they were up against. Fear had replaced confidence. Soldiers on foot were scattered, some tending to their wounded comrades, others hiding behind broken terrain. The Matilda's reputation had been cemented, etched into the minds of every observer. A single British tank capable of stopping a mechanized advance. British infantry cautiously emerged from trenches and hedgerows, their faces pale, eyes wide. Whispers of awe passed among them. "Did you see that?" one soldier muttered. "The Matilda, it's unstoppable." Another shook his head. Disbelief mingled with respect. For many, this day would be remembered not as a victory of numbers, but as a triumph of courage, skill, and steel. Stevens allowed himself a moment to glance at his crew. The gunner wiping soot from his brow, the loader checking spent shells, the driver adjusting for traction. For men who had been ordinary soldiers a day ago had become living legends. Yet the cost was evident. Every battle left its mark, and the adrenaline that had sustained them now gave way to exhaustion. The fog of war lingered, heavy in lungs and mind alike. In the distance, German officers gathered, assessing the wreckage. Panic had spread throughout the ranks. Confidence in their armored division had collapsed in minutes. Reports would later describe it as a miraculous resistance, a single tank halting the advance of an entire mechanized force. Even within their own command, disbelief prevailed. They had underestimated not just British armor, but the determination and precision of its crew. Stevens knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield had been won for the moment, but the war was far from over. The Matilda II, slow-moving yet unstoppable in the right hands, had rewritten expectations. Commanders on both sides would now think twice before dismissing it. And for Stevens and his crew, the memory of this morning, the roar of engines, the screams of panicked Germans, the smell of scorched metal and mud, would never fade. Amid the chaos, Stevens climbed out onto the tank's hull, mud squelching under his boots. He surveyed the battlefield, burned-out tanks, scattered gear, broken terrain. The enormity of their stand was overwhelming. The men around him were quiet, exhausted, absorbing the scope of what they had just survived. There was pride, yes, but tempered by the awareness that war demanded unrelenting vigilance. One mistake, one misstep, could undo everything. Nearby, British medics tended to wounded infantry and the few surviving Germans who had surrendered. Stevens watched them move efficiently, calmly, a stark contrast to the chaos that had reigned just moments before. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of an armored division's advance, and yet life, slow, painful, persistent, was returning. Every motion, every sound reminded him that the line they had held was fragile, and only courage and discipline had kept it intact. The psychological impact was profound. German crews, trained to fear little, had faced what they could not penetrate: a wall of armor, a storm of precise fire, and a crew that refused to yield. Confidence had turned to terror. Across the valley, whispers of the invincible tank began to circulate. By nightfall, the story would reach other units, altering morale, strategy, and perception. One British tank, for men, and a calculated approach had changed the battlefield's equation forever. Inside the Matilda, the crew allowed themselves a short, quiet moment. Mud streaked their faces, hands trembled with adrenaline, but their eyes shone with a fierce pride. They had not just survived, they had made history. Stevens glanced at his gunner, then his loader, then his driver. Each man nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. Today, they had stood alone against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But Stevens also knew that war did not pause for heroism. More panzers could arrive at any hour. Artillery could rain down from unseen hills. The victory of this morning was only temporary, a flash of defiance that had cost them nearly everything. Still, in that moment, they allowed themselves the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done the impossible. Held a line, shattered a division, and become legends. Smoke curled into the sky, fading slowly, carrying with it the remnants of fire and fear. The Matilda's tracks pressed into the mud, steady, unbroken. Around it, soldiers, both British and captured Germans, moved cautiously, navigating the carnage with reverence and trepidation. The valley itself seemed to exhale, the chaos settling into a tense calm. Stevens allowed himself one final glance at the battlefield, eyes lingering on the twisted hulk of the division commander's Panzer IV. He could almost feel the shift in strategy, the ripple of disbelief spreading through the German ranks. The day had been won, but the consequences, the lessons, the stories, would ripple far beyond Arras. Armored warfare, once defined by numbers and speed, had been redefined by precision, courage, and steel. And in the midst of it all, the Matilda II sat unyielding, an icon of defiance in a war defined by destruction. Its crew had survived, yes, but more than that, they had left a mark on history, one that would echo through the annals of armored combat forever. Yet as they settled back into the Matilda, checking ammunition, assessing damage, and preparing for whatever came next, Stevens knew the war would not wait. Every legend has a price, every hero a test, and the next challenge could be closer than they imagined. The valley had fallen into a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Smoke curled lazily into the overcast sky, fading streaks of black against the pale morning light. Burned-out tanks smoldered, their metal twisted, scorched, and silent. The hedgerows lay shredded, mud churned into deep ruts by the relentless advance and destruction. Somewhere in the distance, a lone artillery shell detonated, a hollow echo of chaos that had only recently consumed the field. Inside the Matilda II, Sergeant Harold Stevens and his crew sat in grim silence, the adrenaline of combat slowly ebbing from their veins. Hands shook, mud caked their faces, eyes red from smoke and tension, but pride burned beneath the exhaustion. They had done what few thought possible. For men, one slow toy had held an entire panzer division at bay. They had redefined what armored warfare could mean, and the weight of that reality pressed heavily on their shoulders. Outside, British infantry cautiously moved through the battlefield, checking for survivors and securing the area. Some whispered stories of the Matilda's invincibility, disbelief and admiration in equal measure. "Did you see that?" one soldier murmured, voice hushed as though speaking too loudly might shatter the memory. It's like she's alive." The tank, for all its steel and rivets, had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol, a moving fortress that embodied courage, discipline, and ingenuity. German survivors were scattered and demoralized. The panzers that had survived were retreating slowly, engines whining in hesitation. Commanders conferred, faces pale, voices low with disbelief. They had encountered armored superiority before, but never like this. One tank holding back a division, a crew so disciplined, so unyielding, that even the most confident German officers were forced to rethink their strategies. Confidence had been shattered. Terror had replaced it. The valley bore witness to a new era of armored combat, one defined not by speed or numbers alone, but by precision, courage, and resolve. Stevens climbed onto the hull of the Matilda, mud squelching under his boots. He looked over the battlefield, eyes tracing the lines of destroyed tanks, burned-out engines, scattered debris. He felt the enormity of what they had accomplished. A single stand that would echo far beyond the fields of Arras. The crew gathered around him, faces smeared with soot, eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. "Not a word to waste," Stevens muttered, voice steady but low. "We did what we could. We survived." The words were simple, but beneath them lay an understanding of the battlefield's cruel reality. Heroism was not just about firepower. It was about patience, observation, and the courage to act when everything else seemed hopeless. News of the Matilda II's stand would travel quickly. British commanders would take note, relaying the story to headquarters. Soldiers on the front lines would tell of the Invincible tank that had stopped an entire division. German forces, meanwhile, would approach future engagements with caution, haunted by the memory of a slow, deliberate, steel behemoth that refused to yield. One small unit, for brave men, had changed the perception of armored warfare forever. Yet even as history began to take shape, the Matilda's crew understood the personal cost. Wounds, fatigue, and the psychological toll of combat were heavy burdens. Each explosion, each cry, each close call would linger in memory. The battle was won, but the war raged on. Still, for this moment, for this brief victory, they had rewritten expectations. They had proven that courage and discipline could overcome fearsome odds. Stevens watched as the last of the German panzers retreated beyond the horizon, engines fading into the morning mist. A hush settled over the valley. Smoke drifted from burning vehicles, curling into the sky like a grim testament to the battle fought. The soldiers on both sides were left to reckon with what had happened, and in that reckoning, respect, and perhaps fear, was born. In the years that followed, the tale of the Matilda II at Arras would be recounted in countless letters, reports, and histories. It became a legend, a case study in military schools, a reminder that ingenuity and courage could outmatch overwhelming firepower. For historians, it was a turning point in understanding the value of heavy armor and precise coordination. For soldiers, it was an inspiration, proof that even the smallest unit could leave an indelible mark on the tide of war. Stevens' crew would carry the memory with them for the rest of their lives. Every veteran of that stand, gunner, loader, driver, commander, knew the valley's mud and smoke by heart. They remembered the roar of engines, the flash of explosions, the smell of burning steel, and the terrified shouts of the enemy. But more than anything, they remembered the quiet triumph of survival, the satisfaction of knowing that their discipline and courage had made a difference far beyond their own lives. The Matilda II itself, battered but unbroken, would continue to serve, each scratch and dent a testament to the morning it became legendary. Its steel hull bore witness to history, a silent monument to the bravery of 4 men who refused to yield. To the Germans who faced it, it was an impossible adversary. To the British, it was proof that ingenuity, precision, and courage could alter the course of battle. As the sun climbed higher, piercing the remnants of mist and smoke, the battlefield became still. The valley, scarred and battered, seemed to exhale. The moment of legend had passed, but its echo would endure forever. And in the quiet aftermath, one thing was certain. The story of the invincible Matilda II, and the crew that had wielded her with unmatched courage, would be told as long as people spoke of armored warfare and the bravery it demanded. Stevens and his crew climbed down from the hull, faces streaked with mud, hands stiff from recoil, hearts still pounding. They had survived the impossible, They had changed the course of a battle, shattered assumptions, and left a mark that would endure. The valley had been their crucible, the Matilda their instrument of defiance, and the echoes of that morning would resonate far beyond the fields of Arras. And so, history remembered them, not just as soldiers but as legends. Steel had met courage, smoke had met precision, and one British tank had changed the battlefield forever.